Ben.
Oh,
think
let's see.
that
Go
Ben,
ahead.
and then I'll call people. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you, Rabbi. To prove that he, she, it is the superpower.
That's what I think. Rebecca, what were you going to say?
I think it's to propel the Hebrews forward, to
Sorry.
not hold back, thinking that you're a slave and you can't do this, but to propel them forward into this next portion of their lives.
Okay, I think that's interesting. In this particular place, though, he says, God says he, Maimonides says we just say he because we try to understand God, but it's not he. But anyway, um, I'm hardening Pharaoh's heart. I'm hardening the heart of the Egyptians so that they will know my might or they will know my wonders or whatever. And it seems like God's priority is um, that not just the Israelites, well, certainly them too, but the Egyptians or the foreigners or the pagans know that God is the God or the super God, as Ben said. Why would why would this be important? Think about, like, even as the writers of the Torah, of the writer of this story, why would, I mean, whether it literally happened or not, but this is the way the narrative is going, that this is what the dialogue they're putting in God's mouth. Why would this be important in the ancient world, do you think?
Oh,
So that you have someone to follow,
Okay, so you
or
have
to let the people know I'm your leader. Everybody
okay,
else is speaking through me, but I'm your leader.
okay. Cindy, what did you think?
Well, there's still idolatry going on, and some cultures worshiping many gods. So God wants to show, no, there's just one God. All of that is false.
Right, and it's like everybody else was having multiple gods. This is the only monotheistic philosophy ever, existing at this time, though there is this historical account that for a while in Egypt there was a monotheistic religion that was overthrown, but that was the sun. It was the sun that they worshiped, but it was just one deity. But here, and so it seems like this was written, in like 800, written down 800 BCE. This took place like 1200 BCE. So there still was a lot of paganism in the world all around the Israelite people. And their story is really about, not only is he our Redeemer and our Savior, but he's more powerful than your gods. He's more powerful than your gods. And don't forget, at that time, Pharaoh was considered a god. The pharaohs were gods as well. So there's a lot of like trying to emphasize the power and the one Adonai, of the God of the Israelite people. And how do you think it would influence the Israelite people themselves after being 400 years in Egypt?
They can
So,
trust him.
well, they don't know
Or
God very well. They
true.
haven't really heard from God for a really long time. They've been sort of, we assume, worshiping, the rabbis, of course, the sages from the rabbinic era always ascribed to the Israelites, oh, they remained faithful they kept their Hebrew names, they remained faithful. But realistically, if you're living in a culture for 400 years of multiple gods, it's got to rub off on you, and haven't really heard from God. That's why we see once they're freed, God gives them the Torah, gives them all these laws, all this stuff that they knew nothing about. They didn't even have Shabbat at this time. So God's both talking to the Israelites, or impressing them or influencing them, and the greater ancient world. And honestly, in ancient Israel, when this was written down, there was a lot of crossover between Jews and Canaanites and pagan, and going back and forth. And they found multiple little goddesses all over. So it was still in fluctuation between monotheism and polytheism. So this text is really trying to impress on everyone the power of the one monotheistic God of the Israelite people. Okay, so you can read a little more, Cindy. And we're down to
3.
3.
So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh and said to him, "So said the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, and they will worship me."
Okay, and also the expression "let my people go" in Hebrew is shalach et ami, which really means send my people out, send them out, let them go, but I like shalach et ami, send ami, my people. The word am Yisrael Chai, that's how old this word is. Go ahead.
For if you refuse to let them go, behold, tomorrow I am going to bring locusts into your borders, and they will obscure the view of the earth, and no one will be able to see the earth. And they will eat the surviving remnant which remains from you from the hail, and they will eat all your trees that grow out of the field.
Okay, so it's pretty horrible. Already they've had hail. This is the 8th plague, I believe, 8th plague. And these poor Egyptian people have no recourse. And this Pharaoh is, refusing and bringing all these plagues on them. Okay, let's just talk again about this idea. Hi, Panina, nice to see you. Of hardening or strengthening Pharaoh's heart. You know what I mean? So here's the big debate. If God strengthens or hardens his heart, is it Pharaoh's fault that he says no? If God's strengthening, hardening his heart, is Pharaoh responsible? Rebecca.
I started reading a blog this morning that I haven't finished, and I think that the blog was saying that when the Pharaoh started throwing the Hebrew, when the Pharaoh said to kill the firstborn Jew and they were being thrown into the Nile, at that time the Nile was considered a god. So if the Nile was considered a god and Pharaoh is having these babies drown in this river, obviously Pharaoh didn't really care much about anything.
Right.
He didn't give a lot of importance to the worshiping of maybe certain gods in his culture, and that God, our God, had to strengthen. Perhaps our God had to strengthen Pharaoh's heart so that it had more meaning for the Hebrews when they actually did escape, because they had to fight. They had to put up. They had to be strong themselves. They had to. Sometimes when things come too easy, you don't really understand it or respect the process that much. If you have to struggle a little bit, then the end result is that much more better. And
yes, there's actually a commentary that I read that said that the Israelites, the Hebrew slaves, had been so debased by their life as slaves for so long that they didn't even know how bad it was. They were used to it. And I've sort of mentioned this before, maybe in this class. I think about us, how debased we are in this society. We walk past people living, homeless people, ragged people, mentally ill people on the street, sleeping in these disgusting tents and whatever. And we just walk by. It's like we're used to it and we know about it. And yeah. And so the idea was that the Israelites were used to this slave life. And we know they're mentally, they were very fragile and had no resilience, constantly were crying and wailing and being fearful because of their lives. And so one idea was that it had to be really bad for them to finally say, wow, this is unbearable. I want something better. So that was one possibility. Pnina.
Rebecca started on the right path. The fact that it was a struggle between the gods. God has to establish, first of all, that he is the God, because Pharaoh was considered to be a God himself.
We talked all about this right before you got on.
Right, exactly.
All this.
So that's why I'm saying that that's whole idea of establishing, first of all, if you want to accept his commandments, first of all, he has to establish the fact that he is the authority, the God. That's
Absolutely.
all. Thank you.
Right. You're absolutely right. We sort of talked about that already. Okay. So, Susan Ehrlich, why don't you read? And we were at number 6.
Right. And your houses and the houses of all your servants. And the house, where are we? Okay. And the houses of all the Egyptians will be filled, which your fathers and your fathers' fathers did not see since the day that they were on earth until this day. Therewith he turned and left Pharaoh.
So he gave this, that if you don't do it, it's going to be such a phenomenon of locust infestation. Like no one has seen it. Your fathers, your grandfathers, to this day, no one has seen this horrible infestation. Keep going.
So Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long will this one be a stumbling block to us? Let the people go, like already, and they'll worship their God. Don't you yet know that Egypt is lost?
Okay, so isn't that interesting? I don't remember that. I didn't remember that they said enough already. We're not going to win this struggle with him. How much more? We can't take it.
Yeah.
We don't want it.
Is that the same in all translations? That second part, I did remember let them go already, but what number was that?
This is a Chabad translation.
Okay.
So, I don't think they would add or
Right. Are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost? Is what Etz Chaim says.
Yeah, that's what they say. It's lost. It's lost. So I didn't remember that when I was reading. I went, "Oh wow, that's interesting." What they said. And so here's Peg. Okay, so let's continue. I just thought that was something to note. And why don't you read a little more, Susan?
Okay. So thereupon Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go worship the Lord your God. Who are going?"
Okay, so in other words, all right, who are you taking with you for this worshiping?
Yeah.
Okay, so Ben, why don't you read? 9.
Moses said, with our youth and with our elders, we will go, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our cattle, we will go, for it is a festival of the Lord to us. So he, Pharaoh, said to them, so may the Lord be with you, just as I will let you and your young children out. See that evil is before your faces. Not so. Let the men go now and worship the Lord, for that is what you request. And he chased them out from before the Pharaoh.
Okay, so basically that's kind of convoluted translation, but he's saying, no way am I letting your children go. The men can go. I'm not letting the children go. So we could see the children as hostages. So the rabbis, I read a commentary, said, why do you think they wanted their children? Also, I find it interesting, and there's no explanation. They say they have cattle and they have, flocks. I thought they were slaves.
Right.
Where did they get the cattle? But it's not, it's not logical there. But why do you think they want their children to go?
Not to go.
No, they want to take their children. Pharaoh doesn't want them.
Not to go because they're like hostages. I mean,
well, it's also
and he keeps them there. The people, the men they are going to want to come back to their children, make sure that they're safe. So,
and they're younger and they can do more work.
They're younger and they can do more work. And Ben, what were you going to say?
I may be misunderstood the question, but the Jews, or to be Jews, wanted to take their children for the future to have,
Well, but the ruse, I think it's a ruse, is like, we're going to go worship God. We want to worship our God. And then they don't say they're not coming back. They don't, it's sort of implied, and then we'll come back. But Pharaoh's
we're going to go.
Yeah. Now, I read a commentary from the Talmud that says, I thought this was beautiful. it was gonna be a holiday or a festival or a celebration, and the Talmud says that and no festival or celebration is complete without our children participating. So I thought that was very beautiful and very rabbinic. You know, we need our children for real joy to celebrate. And we know the children are very important in the Pesach story and telling the 4 questions and telling your children. Brad, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it a bit ironic that this whole story begins with Pharaoh killing the Israelite children, and now he's keeping them? I mean, the whole rationale behind this was that they were too numerous, and they'd become a threat, and yet why would you want to keep this potential threat? It's odd. I mean, you'd think you'd want to expel them as well,
Okay, I haven't thought about this,
since
but
you originally wanted to kill them.
only the boys.
Right.
Only the boys. Okay,
Okay.
wait, Cindy.
Well, without the parents, the Egyptians could brainwash the children, not teach them about their heritage, and make them all Egyptians.
Well, they're killing the baby boys at birth.
No, but at this point, if
Right.
they kept the kids without the fathers, they could
That's right.
kind of sway them to the Egyptian way.
Well, Brad, I think about in a horrible way, like Negro slaves, where the masters would sleep with the women and they would have children and it would be more slaves, that they would still be considered slaves. So, I mean, if you killed the boys and you have all the women and girls, you have a baby making factory for slaves without any men to protect them. So that's another possibility, that they only killed the boys, so they would keep the girls. I've actually read about these Mormon or extreme sects where they kick out the boys and keep the girls and, have all these children, but when the boys turn a teenager, they get rid of them or something. So it's pretty diabolical. And yeah, so I could see why he would still want the women for slavery and not the men. And he's sending out the men, interestingly enough. I don't know, they didn't say we want to take our wives. They said we're going to go and we want our children, but I guess the women are implied. Okay, Ben, a little more. You're still reading? Okay, and he said, no, there's no way. You're not taking your kids. Now get out of here. And he just backtracked. So 12.
The Lord said to Moses, stretch forth your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, and they will ascend over the land of Egypt, and they will eat the vegetation of the earth, and that the hail has left all that the hail has left over.
So the hail, which was the previous plague, had already
done some damage,
killed the crops and beaten things down. So this is whatever's left. So it's really bringing on starvation. Okay, keep going.
So Moses stretched forth his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord let an east wind in the land all that day and all that night. By the time it was morning, the east wind had borne the locusts. The locusts ascended over the entire land of Egypt, and they aligned within all the borders of Egypt, very severe. Before them, there was never such a locust plague, and after it, there will never be one like it. They obscured the view of the earth, and the earth became darkened, and they ate the vegetation of the earth and all the fruits of the trees, which the hail had left over, and no greenery was left in the trees or in the vegetation of the fields throughout the entire land of Egypt.
Oh, this is so
pretty
brutal.
Bad.
So brutal. And
wiped out.
I mean, from the beginning, their cattle had died. They had these locusts. Their water was infected. I mean, it's all this. All the natural world has become. I mean, if you're imagining plagues for a rural society or a society that depended on flocks and crops and whatever, these are the plagues that would destroy you. Yes. And then lice, don't forget lice they had. Go ahead, Brad.
But these are not targeted plagues because they affect the Israelites as well as the Egyptians. The Israelites are suffering from these plagues as well.
Well, the Israelites did not get lice, and apparently, in the commentaries will say that the Israelites were not affected or afflicted by the locusts. There's this idea that it only affected the Egyptians. It's a story. And in the story, God protects them from these terrible plagues. But these plagues are the worst kind of natural plagues. But you're right, you would think, but it doesn't really. The implication is the Israelites did not suffer in the same way, though it's not in the text. I agree.
But they ate all the vegetation, so that would impact the Jews too, the Israelites. If there was
You're
no
right.
fruit on the trees and no greenery left.
You're right. The only time that we see God protecting them is in the slaying of the firstborn, where he says, get out of the way because it's going to affect you, but it doesn't affect the. You're right. And there's no commentary on it that I have found. I'm sure the rabbis, if I looked at Maimonides or some of the Rashi or whatever, would say that the Israelites in some way were protected, or their food was protected, or they weren't infested with the locusts because they lived in their own section, and so there's this idea that there was this magical ring around them and they were protected in some way.
But it
Because
said all of Egypt.
I know. I have no
Border to
answer for
border.
you.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to be guessing that God thinks they'll figure it out on their own?
No, I'm sure they were supposedly protected. How could you?
I'm just kind of, I mean, I could read this over and over again and I still don't get it.
Well, or there's always more questions, and I'm sure there's tons of midrash that I didn't look into that will give you answers to all of these questions, and they'll say, yes, Brad, did you have a question?
Well, maybe this gets back to your original question, and maybe the Jews, the Israelites, also need to be convinced of the power of Yahweh here. So it's by making them suffer. They're also. This is a way of enforcing that knowledge on them as well.
Well, I will just look up, or does somebody have a computer handy? Or I'll look it up. Hold on. I'm going to say, what happened to the Israelites during the 10 plagues? What happened to the Israelites during the 10 plagues? Okay, let me see what it says. Okay, the Bible tells us somewhere that the plagues only came against the Egyptians and did not affect the Israelites. That was in Wikipedia. Okay, so apparently it did not affect them. That's what, yes, Rebecca.
Well, except for that they were witnessing all of it.
They were witnessing it, but they were not experiencing it. So, okay, it must be in there somewhere, but it's not in this text. Okay, Brad, do you want to read? And we are at
according to ChatGPT, see, the Israelites were spared these afflictions.
Right. That's what I just said. I looked that up.
Yeah, but where is it in the text?
Exactly.
Well, it doesn't have to be in the text. It's just what it's.
All right. Okay, so 16, Brad.
Pharaoh hastened to summon Moses and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. But now forgive now my sin only this time, and entreat the Lord your God, and let him remove from me just this death. So he, Moses, left Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord reversed a very strong west wind, and it picked up the locusts and thrust them into the Red Sea. Not one locust remained within all the borders of Egypt. Maybe that's a foreshadowing of the Egyptians being thrust into the Red Sea.
Oh, very good. I like that idea.
But the Lord strengthened the Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go out.
Okay, just do like go till 23.
Okay. The Lord said to Moses, stretch forth your hand towards the heavens, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt, and the darkness will become darker. So Moses stretched forth his hand towards the heavens, and there was thick darkness over the entire land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see each other, and no one rose from his place for 3 days. But for all the children of Israel, there was light in their dwelling.
Okay, so at least, okay, Susan?
So I think this was a conundrum that widened the locusts and the trees. But I think if we're talking about miracles, which is what we're doing here,
right?
This last sentence saying that the darkness did not affect the Israelites can be seen as going backwards too, that the locusts and the other crud that was thrown at them, the boils and all of that, also did not affect the Israelites. And that would be a miracle, wouldn't it? And we're talking about miracles here.
Yeah, we're talking about miracles. The thing about the darkness, there's very interesting commentary that, okay, so I want to ask your opinion. We've seen all these horrible plagues, and the next one is the worst. Why would darkness be the ninth? Why would darkness be considered worse than locusts and lice and cattle disease and blood and frogs? Why darkness, do you think?
No flashlights.
Alex.
Because Rabbi, as you mentioned before, the sun god was one of their most important, if not their most important god in their pantheon of deities. So important that eventually, at some point, some pharaoh made some form of monotheism, worshiping just the sun.
Right.
So the point is, the sun god is extremely important in ancient Egyptian culture. So for the sun, and therefore the sun god, to disappear for 3 days must have been an existential crisis for the Egyptians, unlike anything they'd ever seen. I mean, they had seen locusts before, they had seen storms, they had seen pestilence, but like they had never ever seen the sun go out for like 3 days, and that must have been crazy, insane.
Terrifying. I love that idea. I love that. That's a great one. Any other, Abby, is your hand up?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna just summarize ChatGPT, and it basically says that contrast with the Israelites, the darkness plague is it only affected the Egyptians. The Israelites had light in their dwellings. This contrast highlighted the protection and favor they had from God, intensifying the impact on the plague on the Egyptians. And for the Egyptians, it was basically total immobilization, a psychological impact of being helpless, and a spiritual symbolism when there's darkness, the absence of God, evil, and all of that. So the Israelites, again, were not affected because they had light in their dwellings. It was just the Egyptians.
Right. But what we were asking is, why would that be worse than all the other plagues? Because if they're sort of intensifying in bad, and I think what one of the things Alex pointed out is like it was the obliteration of one of their gods. If the sun god was like so that is terrifying and shows a huge power of the Israelite God. Yeah, go ahead.
It says total immobilization, but the Egyptians, they had no light, they could not do anything. Psychological impact because they were experiencing confusion and fear.
Right.
And spiritual symbolization of evil because darkness is an evil. Oh yeah, the sun god, especially the sun god Ha, which would have been deeply unsettling. Yes.
Okay.
Ellen, Alex, sorry.
Nina.
Okay. 1 minute.
You're on. Go ahead.
Now you're muted.
Now you're muted.
Okay. Okay now? Yeah, okay. The idea of the God superiority follows up also into the parting of the sea. there was also an idea being born that the water is also a form of a god, the oceans, and that was called the Emuna Elis. That was a religion of its own.
Okay.
That recognized the water as the god. And this was called the Emuna Elis. So this idea that it overcame the god of the sun, like the sun is a god, shows us that this is the right state of mind. That the next was the water, because he took them through the water and the water parted. So he's also in charge of the water. So that again, to emphasize the greatness of God.
Yes.
His superiority.
Right. That's right. I think you're right. Wait, Brad.
Well, I'm just picking up on a couple of those things that Abby mentioned. And it's this is the only plague that seems to be able to function on a metaphoric level. You know, because darkness, I mean, think of Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, darkness has so many metaphoric meanings other than the simple state of nature. So it in that sense, it's different from any of the other plagues.
Yes, and okay, and also there is a commentary that says that it was not only a physical darkness, but it created a deep depression, that people were deeply depressed. There was a you implied that psychological darkness, but that it was it was physically dark and they were mentally dark, you know, afraid, suicidal, immobilized. It was a terrible, terrible, and it's the only one, as we've all said, that didn't just affect the body, but also affected the mind and the psyche. And so that's why this one was so terrible. And it's an interesting commentary, you know, a modern idea that, you know, we can sometimes survive or endure physical affliction, but mental affliction is considered even more difficult to overcome. Pnina.
Okay, I also want to add that the babies, those babies, they were feared to grow up and become an army that will go against them.
Right, that's right.
So you see it today, what's going on. The males are, they didn't give back the males.
That's right. That's right. They didn't.
And they killed a lot of babies, just like that, for the
so it's still going on.
The future and the strength of the nation. So they keep the babies. They kept them. Because eventually it becomes a nation by itself, and then, it will turn around and fight Pharaoh.
Okay, you're right. Okay, so let's continue. Hi, Lorraine. Nice to see you. Rebecca, do you want to read? How about Rebecca? So now they had the horrible, but the Israelites had the light, which is also a metaphor for hope, for wisdom, for knowledge, enlightenment, whatever. Okay, and then Pharaoh said, 24.
Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go, worship the Lord, but your flocks and your cattle shall be left. Your younger children may also go with you." But Moses said, "You too shall give sacrifices and burnt offerings into our hands, and we will make them for the Lord our God. And also our cattle will go with us. Not a single hoof will remain, for we will take from it to worship the Lord our God, and we do not know how much we will worship the Lord until we arrive there." The Lord strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he was unwilling to let them out. Pharaoh said to him, "Go away from me, beware. You shall no longer see my face, for on the day that you see my face, you shall die." Thereupon Moses said, "You have spoken correctly. I shall no longer see your face."
So I find it interesting that Moses also will not negotiate and compromise. It's like, no, let us take your children. No, you can't take children. All right, now you say you can take your children, but we want all our flocks. So Moses wants everything, and Pharaoh also is fed up. And of course, there's also this phenomenon, you know, when things happen we ascribe it to God. Like, did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Is that a metaphor for, you know, his own heart became hard? There are people today that anything that happens, they ascribe it to God. God made me meet you. God made this happen. God, you know, it's God's will. It's God's will. So they're saying that's another idea. But anyway, Pharaoh said no, and I'm fed up. And if you show up again, I'm going to kill you. You're never going to see me again. If I see you again, I'm going to kill you. And Moses says, yeah, you won't see my face again, or, you know, I'm not going to die, but this is it. You're going to have the worst plague yet. So Pharaoh, nothing can change Pharaoh. Think of Putin. I think of him like Putin. Nothing. He's in his own world of power and obsessiveness and, you know, this vision of himself or his country. And there's nothing he will not compromise in any way. He thinks he's always going to be supreme. And so if you think of Pharaoh as Vladimir Putin, you kind of can, I sort of think his personality could have been like that. So who was it? Merle, do you want to read? Okay. Next chapter. The Lord said to Moses. Okay, Merle.
Rabbi, can I ask a question first?
Of course.
About this seeing my face business. I mean, you know, obviously that's that's a theme that comes up again and again about seeing the face, about seeing God's face, etc., etc. I assume it's the same word that's used in all these different. Yeah. It's interesting that it's, you know, you won't be seeing my face is, of course, exactly what God tells the Hebrews.
Yeah, you can't see my face or you'll die.
You'll never see my face or you'll die. So
that's interesting. Maybe there's like
is that like a bad omen to see God's face?
A faint suggestion of divinity in Moses is what I kind of get from that. Yeah. You know, a faint connection of divinity, because Moses does stand out, you know, among this group, you know, as a whole other level of human beings. So I think that is interesting. You know, language does have meaning, and there is something about that idea of, or seeing a face. Maybe it's your face that it makes you the individual, because I mean, all these slaves, they become faceless, you know, when you're enslaved or you're, you know, degraded, you're faceless. And now you're saying, you won't see my face. I have a face. I am a Jew or a Hebrew. I am a person with a face. So
if you see his face, is that like worshiping an idol?
I don't think so. I think Moses is saying, you're never going to see my face again. You're right, because we're going to go. God's going to overpower you, I think. Okay, so Merle, you were going to read, and you are at
11, chapter 11.
Yeah.
The Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards, he will let you go from here. When he lets you out, he will completely drive you out of here. Please speak into the ears of the people and let them borrow each man from his friend and each woman from her friend, silver vessels and golden vessels. So let the Lord give the people favor in the Egyptians' eyes. Also the man Moses was highly esteemed in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants and in the eyes of the people.
Okay. There's a really interesting interpretation of this idea of the Egyptians giving their gold and silver to the Israelites. So according to the commentaries, there were three kinds of Egyptians. The first kind saw them as slaves and didn't give them anything and refused. And they are the ones that had their firstborn die. The second kind were very sympathetic to the Hebrews, very admiring of their God. And they had known them for like, you know, hundreds of years, and they gave them things to leave. And we get that in the book of Deuteronomy, it says when you free a slave, you shouldn't send him away empty-handed. You should give him things to start his new life. And it comes from this story, the connection of how the Egyptians gave things to the Israelites. And then there's a law in Deuteronomy about not letting your Hebrew slave leave with empty-handed. And those people did not have their firstborn. This is a midrash, interpretation. Firstborn killed. And then the third people totally identified with the Israelites because they were slaves or very poor, and they actually went on the Exodus with them and left with them. And so they also did not suffer. They left with them, gave them stuff, but said, we're going to. And there's another midrash that Pharaoh's daughter was among those who left with the Israelites and crossed the sea and converted, basically. So there were these three kinds of Egyptians, and that's where this whole idea that they gave them of their household goods or of their riches, they shared it with them. Okay. So, continue, Merle. And Moses said, 4. Merle, are you there? Hello? You can't turn on your thing, Merle? All right, I'll come back to you. Doug, do you want to read, Douglas? Hello?
Yes, we're starting on 4, right?
Yes.
Moses said, so say the Lord, at the dividing point of the night, I will go out in the midst of Egypt.
And dividing point would be midnight.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
And every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the firstborn of the slave woman who is behind the millstones, and every firstborn animal. And there will be a great cry throughout the entire land of Egypt, such as there was never been, and there shall never be again. But to the children of Israel, not one dog will whet his tongue against either man or beast, in order that you shall know that the Lord will separate between the Egyptians and between Israel. And all of the servants of yours will come down to me and prostrate themselves to me, saying, go out, you and all the people who are at your feet, and afterward I will go out. Then Moses exited from Pharaoh with a burning anger.
Okay. So this was what Moses said to Pharaoh. This is what's going to happen. And we're going to leave, and you're never going to see us again. And so I was reading the Eitz Chaim, which I love this book, this Torah book. I think everybody should get this book. It's fantastic. But in it, it says that, we would say, why would they kill the children instead of the actual adults or something? And the explanation was that in the ancient world, a child was an extension of you. It was part of you. So and I guess they didn't respect life that the same way, but killing a child was a legitimate way of striking at a person. And so no one would have been shocked in the ancient world, or even when the Torah was written, about this kind of a punishment. And we even see it in other places where the children are punished because of the parents' sins. And apparently that was an ancient view of your child. It was property. It was a part of you. It wasn't an individual, except we know, I don't know. And then we look at the Akedah and Moses, Abraham and Isaac, and I'm not clear on that, but that's what they're saying, that it was not such a shocking idea as it would be to us. Why are you hurting the child? Apparently that was a common way of thinking in the ancient world. Alex, did you want to say something?
Yes. So, Rabbi, you mentioned children, but I'm wondering if firstborn,
Yeah, it could be an adult.
it could be an adult,
Right.
and that would add another dimension of horror and chaos, because losing children obviously is totally awful, but losing firstborn, I would imagine in ancient Egypt there were many firstborn who were now adults, who are in positions of power, positions of management, positions of administrating and running the country. So losing all of that institutional collective skill and power in one fell swoop would have been or must have been the absolute worst thing.
You're right. And also, the firstborn is the heir in the ancient, even today, the first often, well, now women and whatever, but even, think about the family in England. It was only like, what, 10 years ago that they said that the daughter could be the firstborn and inherit, but it was the son. So the firstborn, well, mainly the heir, you're right. I don't know if they killed girl firstborns, since girls weren't that valuable in the ancient world. I don't know. But you're right. A good point. It's not, I don't know why, because they were throwing babies into the Nile. I think we sometimes equate the two. This is a tit for tat, but you're right. Firstborn could be a total adult and totally running, one of the princes or the people running the country or whatever. So you're right. Okay. So Alex, why don't you read? Okay, and where am I? Share screen. Okay. So Pharaoh, he left with burning anger. Continue. 9.
The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you in order to increase my miracles in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron had performed all these miracles before Pharaoh, but the Lord strengthened Pharaoh's heart, did not let the children of Israel out of his land.
Okay, so now here we have Pesach, the holiday, the beginning of the holiday, and also this whole preparation for the slaying of the firstborn. So keep going, Alex.
The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt.
By the way, I just want to point out that Aaron is very much a partner in all of this. It's Moses and Aaron. So Aaron is right there. Keep going.
This month shall be to you the head of the months. To you it shall be the first of the months of the year.
So one of the New Years used to be the month in the spring of Nisan. They say there are 4 New Years, but Pesach, this was considered like a new year. And then I don't know why they moved it to the fall, but continue.
Speak to the entire community of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, let each one take a lamb for each parental home, a lamb for each household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor who is nearest to his house shall take one according to the number of people, each one according to one's ability to eat, shall you be counted for the lamb. You shall have a perfect male lamb in its first year. You may take it either from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it for inspection until the 14th day of this month. The entire congregation of the community of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel, on the houses in which they will eat. And on this night they shall eat the flesh, roasted over the fire, and unleavened cakes with bitter herbs they shall eat.
Okay, I don't remember that they were supposed to eat bitter herbs on that very first Pesach. I did not know that. I mean, maybe I knew it once, but I read that and I went, wow. So you're eating lamb, you're eating matzah. So obviously this is before. Hello, yes?
Where are you both now?
What? Hello? I mean,
Oh my God.
It's Miriam's on the phone.
Miriam, you have to, are you
Mute.
talking, or are you gonna, if you're talking to someone else, you gotta mute.
Sorry, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anyway, the first Pesach, they ate matzah, and the commentaries say this is before, leaving in a rush, and they didn't have time for their bread to rise. So matzah was, and in the Seder, they even say this is the bread of affliction, that it was probably the bread that slaves ate. This thin cracker was their bread that they mainly ate. It wasn't brand new only after they left. And you eat matzah and you eat lamb. I don't know why we don't eat lamb on Pesach. We do have the shank bone, I know, but I'm surprised we don't make lamb and bitter herbs. So from the very beginning, we were eating bitter herbs, remembering the bitterness or whatever. So I thought that was interesting. Did you want to say, Brad? Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to maybe observe that if you think of the Torah as an arc, no pun intended, the arc of the narrative, we begin the Israelite story with a commandment, the Akedah, to kill the firstborn. And here we finish with a killing of the firstborn.
Except Isaac wasn't the firstborn.
Well, but killing of a child. But
well, in that case, they're stopped. In that case, it's forbidden. Do not kill
I
the
understand,
child.
and here it's realized.
Yes.
So I'm just saying it's an interesting arc that you begin and end sort of, if you think of this maybe as a tentative ending of the, and it's not, of course, it's not an ending. The story goes on, but it's the same idea of killing a child.
Yes, but also it's also the idea that we don't kill children and that we sacrifice an animal, that it's a substitute for the child. It's the same thing, at both at the same time, substituting for the and cooking it, roasting it, and eating it, and putting the blood and eating bitter herbs and eating matzah. So we just have like a few more minutes, but I just want to get to a line that I think is so interesting for all of us. Okay, you don't eat it rare or boiled, you roast it. And then this is what I wanted to say. And you shall not leave any of it over until morning. Whatever is left over, you shall burn the fire. Here it is. And this is how you shall eat it: with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat in haste. It is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. And then they talk about, of course, how the angel of death or the death will pass over. But you're eating it ready to go with your loins girded and your shoes on, ready for freedom. And I love this idea that we're ready to be free or ready to take the next step in our journey at any moment. Penina.
Okay. I'm going back to the fact that it was the battle of the gods again.
Yeah.
Because the animals also, some of them were considered to be considered to be gods.
Right.
Like we know that they built the golden calf in the calf in the desert,
right,
as a substitute to the presence of God.
Right.
And it's also pay attention to the korbanot, to the sacrifices, the animals. And because again, it's a superiority of God to show that all those are not gods. They are things that you either eat or you're going to use or whatever. But it's not it's not God's.
Right.
I am the God.
Right.
You
it would
take
be like
this
being
bull
in India.
and it's not a God because you're going to slaughter it and you're going to put it on the altar.
And you're going to eat it.
Exactly.
So that's as far as we can get. I think it's we know then they all leave and they rush and they get to the sea. And next week is the Shabbat Shira, which is the Song of the Sea, where they cross, and it's a very musical, beautiful Shabbat.
I want to tell you something quickly regarding the sea. according to the Israeli army that are studying today maneuvers, today it was supposed to be Saudi Arabia that they took them through, and the fact that the water was on a tide, you know, when the moon was full, because the moon was full, was the 15th of the month. The whole idea was to drown the chariots. They should get stuck in the mud.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
That's why
right,
they
'cause
chose, that's why Moses was so smart. They left in the middle of the month when the moon was full, then there was a tide, enough to cover the edges. They didn't need to cross it all the way in. But the whole idea was that the chariot would get stuck in this mud. Yep. So they couldn't go after them.
Okay, everyone. So lovely to study with you.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom,
Shabbat shalom.
everybody.
You.
Thank
Good
you.
Thank
health,
you. Thank you.
joy. Bye-bye.